Hello and welcome to the Premier Football Podcast. This weekend, Arsenal take on Manchester United at Old Trafford in a fixture that was once upon a time a title decider, because between 1996 and 2004, the Premier League was won by one of these two teams every single season. And it got me thinking, what are the main differences between football 20 years ago and football now? Now, don't forget, as always, before we get started, to smash a like on the video, share the content around, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and subscribe to our social media pages as well. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The first difference between football 20 years ago and football today is aggression and masculinity, and that was exemplified in the rivalry between Arsenal and Manchester United. Compare the rivalry of Arsenal and Manchester United, of Roy Keane and Patrick Vieira, of Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, between that of the two best teams in the Premier League over the past 3 seasons, Manchester City and Liverpool. And this, if you could even call it a rivalry, it pales in comparison to that of United and Arsenal. We had the Battle of Old Trafford in 2003, battling, gutsy 0-0 draw, which saw Manchester United given a penalty in the 90th minute. Ruud van Nistelrooy blazed it over the bar, and he was then mobbed by the likes of Martin Keown. I remember him jumping on him in particular. 5 Arsenal players received fines after the game, and 2 Manchester United players received fines after the game. And I mean, think of the tunnel before a Manchester United versus Arsenal game 20 years ago. You had Roy Keane leading out Manchester United, Tony Adams, and then later Patrick Vieira leading out Arsenal. And it was deathly silence. The players were so focused. No one looked at each other. No one acknowledged each other. No one shook hands. Definitely didn't shake hands. There was just an intense focus and stare straight ahead, focus on the match, and literally going out to battle. Nowadays, when Arsenal play Manchester United this weekend, the players are going to be, fist bumping in the tunnel, chatting, playing nice to each other. And if you think about the, Manchester City versus Liverpool and Klopp versus Guardiola, that intensity and rivalry just isn't there. There have been some relatively feisty fixtures between these two teams over the last 3 years, but nothing in comparison to that between Manchester United and Arsenal when Arsene Wenger and Sir Alex Ferguson were at the peak of their powers between 1996 and 2004. Number 2 is brutal honesty, and I'm thinking in particular of Kevin Keegan's legendary rant as Newcastle manager in 1996, when he said, "I will love it if we beat them," in reference to playing Manchester United in what was then in that year a title decider, obviously a little bit outside of the time frame that I'm talking about, but it's thereabouts. But these days you just don't see that level of brutal honesty in a television interview. Managers and players have a carefully curated image to maintain. There's public relations at play, where clubs even have PR staff who are ensuring that managers and players don't give off the wrong impression and don't say the wrong thing. And everyone is so squeaky clean these days. Even if you think back to Rafael Benitez in 2009, when he had a 5-10 minute rant to the press about Sir Alex Ferguson, when he was stating about all these facts about Manchester United getting preferential treatment. It's just not something that you see anymore, for better or worse. And the 1990s and early 2000s and mid 2000s were just a simpler time where people were much more likely to say what they actually think. I think the only manager these days who is consistent in his controversial media approach is Jose Mourinho, because that's the image that he's always had, and that's the image that actually suits him now. So he always plays up to that kind of villainous character, and he's taken that on very well. But everyone else is, if you think of like Jurgen Klopp, he's Frank Lampard, Mikel Arteta, Pep just complains. I mean, most managers these days, they have a moan about fixture pile up, and they might talk about a controversial decision against their team, but they never really lose the plot. They're all very careful to toe the line. So that is number 2. Brutal honesty. Number 3 is a love of flair players. 20 years ago, physicality meant tough tackling and a no-nonsense approach, and fitness levels were just not what they are now. Nowadays, it is imperative for all players to be able to cover high amounts of ground over the course of 90 minutes, to press to an extreme intensity, and to sprint a huge amount during the game. 20 years ago, there were teams building their sides around flair players such as Matt Le Tissier, Dennis Bergkamp, Gianfranco Zola, Paolo Di Canio, David Ginola, Eric Cantona, a little bit later Dimitar Berbatov, but you get the picture. There was always a place for players like this. Squads were built around them to make sure that these players could shine, could show everyone what they could do, and could make their teams tick. And number 10 was an essential part of teams in a 4-4-2 in the 1990s, dropping a little bit deeper than the number 9, and then in a 4-2-3-1 in the early to mid 2000s, playing in behind the striker with 2 wingers alongside them. And that's just not the case today. I mean, we've just seen Mesut Ozil, one of the best technical players of his generation, one of the best playmakers of his generation, be completely left out of Arsenal's Europa League and Premier League squads because apparently, there are other issues at play, which I've discussed previously, but the message from the club and from Mikel Arteta is that he doesn't fit into the current style of play. And since he signed for Arsenal in 2013, there have always been criticisms leveled at Ozil from the British footballing press that he is not physical enough, that he doesn't run enough, that he doesn't sprint enough, that he doesn't press enough. And that is the main difference today. I mean, the best number 10, if you can call him a number 10 these days, is Kevin De Bruyne, who is an all-action, no-nonsense midfielder, but with incredibly good technique and the ability to play defense-splitting passes at will. I mean, it's great that the physical side of the game is so good these days. I mean, contrast 20 years ago, the best player in the world was Ronaldo, the Brazilian Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, who, although, he's the best striker that I've ever seen play the game, but he was overweight for half of his career, and he had the latter half of his career, he was dogged by a serious knee problem. I mean, contrast him with Cristiano Ronaldo, who is one of the best players of all time. But as well as being one of the best players of all time, he is an athlete, and the emphasis that he has always put on his physical condition is insane in comparison to that of the original Ronaldo and many other players, flair players, I should say, back in the day. Number 4 is unknown elite foreign players. There was a time when Arsene Wenger seemed to have a conveyor belt of top players coming in from across the European leagues. You could think of Nicolas Anelka, Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, Freddie Ljungberg, Robert Pires, Edu, Lauren, just a conveyor belt of top talent that no one else seemed to really know about. And it was very easy for Arsenal to attract these top foreign players. Not just Arsenal, you could think of the likes of Middlesbrough, who had Fabrizio Ravanelli. They had Juninho in the 1990s. Coventry City had Mustafa Hadji and Yusuf Chipu, two excellent Moroccan players in the 1990s and early 2000s. Spurs, they were not what they were today. Spurs were a bang average mid-table team, but they signed Jurgen Klinsmann not once, but twice. Chelsea, again, not what they were today. They were kind of 5th and 6th, fairly average upper mid-table to upper table Premier League club. They signed Ruud Gullit, Gianfranco Zola, Gianluca Vialli. Newcastle signed Faustino Asprilla, even though they were a pretty good team when they did that. But still, there was so many quality players coming in to the Premier League, and the difference then was that they were to like the creme de la creme on top of the British core. And with the progression of scouting, certainly in terms of the technology involved in it now, the competition for players from other countries, for foreign players, is so much higher than what it once was. And even for fans, the amount of European football now easily accessible on television is at an all-time high. With YouTube, you can watch highlights of any league in the world. You can watch compilations of pretty much any player in the world. And with games like Football Manager, any regular fan can become an expert on the next generation of wonder kids. This just wasn't the case 20 years ago. Number 5 is a wider competition for top 6. Now, in the present day, you frequently have mid-table clubs spending 20 to 30 million pounds on players. This was obviously unheard of 20 years ago. But despite this, and despite the current Premier League season being unpredictable so far, there was a clear big 4 between 2004 and 2010, and a clear big 6 between 2010 and 2020. Now, 20 years ago, Spurs, as I mentioned before, were a mid-table team. Manchester City, 20 years ago in the 2000-2001 season, were on course for an 18th place finish in the Premier League and relegation back to what was then known as Division 1. Chelsea and Liverpool were usually in and around the Champions League places. Leeds United often finished in the Champions League places. But between 1996 and 2004, it was almost wide open for who would get the UEFA Cup places and the last Champions League places. I mean, you had Blackburn Rovers finishing in the top 6, Ipswich Town finishing in the top 6, Newcastle finishing in the top 6. Aston Villa finishing in the top 6, and you had clubs like Sunderland and Charlton Athletic being promoted to the Premier League and immediately challenging for European places. I mean, in the present day, Leicester City have obviously bucked that trend twice, winning the Premier League in 2016 and finishing 5th last year when they really should have finished in the top 4. They crumbled towards the end of the season. And Wolves, of course, have finished 7th 2 seasons in a row. But we've still had this concentrated power at the top of the English game, this established big 6. Maybe this year is when it all changes. I know it seemed like it might last year, that it might be more open, and in some ways it was, but at the same time, it wouldn't be surprising at all if the top 6 contained at least 5, if not 6, of the traditional big 6. And the last and perhaps most obvious point on my list is celebrity culture. 1996, Liverpool rocked up for the FA Cup final against Manchester United, decked out in creamy white suits and white and red striped ties. They were rightly mocked for this. They lost the match, and this kind of cultivated their image as the Spice Boys, serial underachievers who cared more about their image than what they were actually doing on the pitch. Now, how many teams could you compare that to today? My club Arsenal certainly springs to mind, that we've just had too many players who care more about their image than their footballing ability over the past 10 to 15 years, and it's a real issue in the game. 20 years ago, players' sole focus was on playing football. Nowadays, people like Jesse Lingard have their own clothing brand. He can't even make the squad for Manchester United. He's ridiculed. He's really not a great player. No offense to him, but I mean, he's cultivated a brand for himself, and not only him, but most top players have their own brand built around them. Mesut Ozil has the M10 brand. You know, every footballer has sponsorship deals with, is involved in advertising. It's just so widespread. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, David Beckham was the first footballer to really dive into this celebrity culture, marrying Posh Spice, and of course, ruining his relationship with Sir Alex Ferguson, who never looked at him in the same way. Nowadays, it's commonplace for players to be involved in celebrity culture, and pretty much every footballer is a celebrity. 20 years ago, that just wasn't the case. So, which period of time was better? Although I have a great affinity for the 1990s and early 2000s, it's hard to argue against the modern game. The entertainment value is just insane. The whole package of it, what the Premier League has become, is an incredible thing to watch season in, season out. This is mainly down to the amount of money in the game, and there are a few other factors why I think the modern game is better as well. Elite training facilities. Every team in the Premier League, West Ham aside, who are obviously famed for having an out-of-date training ground, has a state-of-the-art training facility. The medical facilities are just so much better. The recovery time for players is better. Players are better looked after. The nutrition, which Arsene Wenger obviously brought to England in the 1990s and has now become widespread, is on point. Players are so well looked after now. Their diets are on point, their training programs are on point. As I've mentioned before in this video, the fitness levels are on point now. Every player is an athlete in the modern game, and that just means that although the kind of aggression might not be there, what I was talking about before, the physicality and the sprints and the ground covered much superior to before. So matches are lasting longer, I suppose you could say. People aren't unfit anymore. You can't be unfit as a Premier League player. Although of course I mentioned having quality foreign players in the 1990s and early 2000s, and they were quality, they weren't perhaps the real top bracket of footballers. And at that time, the appeal of Serie A and La Liga was much more prevalent to that of the Premier League. However, now this is reversed. Again, this is because of money. Where whoever's paying the most, that's where the top players are going to go to play. And now the Premier League can attract a wider range of top players. Guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget, as always, to smash a like, share the content around, subscribe if you're new, and subscribe to our socials as well. I've been Joe. It's been a pleasure. Let me know your thoughts on what I've been chatting about in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Did you prefer football back then? Do you think I've missed a few pointers as to what the differences were then and now? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.